welcome to the Big Book Club! Yes. Books are back on telly, which is just where we need them to be in the current madness. It's great to be here at the Tower Digital Arts Centre in Helensburgh. Hello, Helensburgh. Hello. Hello. And I've had a great time going around Scotland bringing you the world's best-loved and best-selling novelists, memoirs, short story writers and poets. Every week I join a different book club. This week I went to Hillhead Library in Glasgow. Fancy wee bit of Glasgow, and I met the lovely people from Tales from the City. Every week we go deep on a theme. Tonight it's secrets and lies. It's also secrets that become lies and lies about secrets, which is basically Sunday lunch with my family. Maybe your family too. We have 4 fantastic guests for you tonight. They are graphic novelist, playwright and crime writer Denise, Mina. Cellist, silver fox and novelist screenwriter Patrick Gale. The man with all the stories, writer Graham Norton. And one of my very favourite poet, playwright, performers, Inua Elms. But first, guess first. Secrets and lies are at the dark heart of every single crime novel, and our next guest is famous for Garnethill, Paddy Meehan and Alex Morrow. Her 14th novel is Conviction, which hurtles us across Europe looking for the answers to questions posed by a really creepy true crime podcast. Please welcome our first guest of the evening, Denise, Mina! As I introduced you, I realised that you and Patrick are silver foxes.
Yes, we are.
It's like double silver fox action in the front row. It's quite hard to read from crime novels without giving too much away, but will you give us a wee reading from Conviction?
I'll read to you from the very beginning.
Right.
Because it is difficult to read, because you don't want to, if there's a twist or somebody turns out to...
What do you mean if there's a twist? It's going to be really bitterly disappointing if there aren't any. Where there's a twist.
So I'm just going to read you right from the very beginning. Just tell the truth. I've said that to my own kids. What a ridiculous thing to teach children. No one wants to hear the truth. There has to be a reason to tell the truth. I stopped some time ago, and let me tell you, it was great. It was the best decision I ever made. Just lie and lie again. Make up a name, a background, your likes and dislikes. Just fabricate the whole thing. It's so much more rational. But I'm telling you the truth in this book, and there's a very good reason for that. I ruined my life by telling the truth. I was very young. My mum had just died, and men gathered in my garden at night to shout abuse at my house because I wouldn't lie. Everyone started discussing what was wrong with me, with people like me. Someone nailed a dead cat to my front door in protest because I told the truth. A man broke into my house and tried to kill me to shut me up for telling the truth. So I shut up. And I ran. I changed my name. I became secretive and careful, and I sealed off that part of my life. I never told it again. When anything even touching on that story came up, house fires, Gretchen Tiegler, football, I just went to the loo, or I changed the subject. I didn't feel as if I was lying. I wasn't Sophie Bugarin anymore. I was Anna MacDonald, and those things were nothing to do with me, and I felt safe.
So, this Anna, this Sophie, she's not reliable, or is she? I can't work it out. When I started the book, I thought,
Who is she?
Yeah, who is she? And also, is she just a big mad liar?
Yeah, I think she is just a big mad liar, but I think she's a big mad liar for a very good reason. And I think there are good reasons not to. Basically, she has a secret that she doesn't want to discuss. So really, the whole book is about not having to tell your story. And, there's a bit in the book and it talks about in our culture, because it's such a confessional culture, if you don't want to tell people everything about you, then you're regarded as somehow ill or it's all repressed. But actually, there can be very good reasons for not baring your soul or sharing everything about yourself or just lying. when I first got published and started doing publicity, there was I thought I was going to have to tell everybody the truth about me. And then I realised not only can you just lie, which I've done many times, but also journalists who are writing about books really don't want you to tell them, the truth about you. They just want a clean enough story, but they don't really want the abstract. It's not Oprah. Do you know what I mean? And it was just the idea of being a public figure and also being a private person. And I think that applies to everybody, because everyone's a public figure now.
Did you then, at the start of your career, manufacture the character of Denise Mina? When did she come into being?
I was going to have a pen name. Penny Dreadful was going to be my pen name. I thought that'd be really funny. And then
your agent was like, "Oh, it's going to be a hard sell."
No, actually, a friend of mine said, "Look, no one's going to read that book, but if you publish it under your own name, you'll have a book with your name on it."
Yeah.
And you'll never write a second book. So it was a kind of in joke. Do you know what I mean? But I think I was very aware of creating. I was very aware of creating a public persona who didn't have imposter syndrome. I think a lot of writers have imposter syndrome. And at the beginning I thought, right, I'm not going to lie, and I would go on stage and I would talk about how uncomfortable it was to be looked at and how I wasn't that interesting anyway. And then one day I was doing an event and I looked out in the audience and everyone was kind of like, "Oh, Jesus." And I thought, these people paid to get in here. No one needs to listen to this. Do you know what I mean? They're here because they're interested in books. They want you to talk about books. They don't want you to bare your soul, I've seen other people do that, and I have to say, if it's very, very bad, it's quite funny. But most of the time, it's just a wee bit sad.
So we're not going to get a memoir?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't think I would ever write a memoir.
No.
No, I don't think so. No. I don't know, but your voice is so loud compared to everybody else in your life. And, I've misremembered, exes, "Oh, he was a swine." And then you meet them years later and you're like, "Actually, you're quite a nice guy. You just, we didn't get on." Or, do you know what I mean? And, but you would be characterising people or telling stories. And what is the truth? Because that is, that is the issue, is what is the abstract truth. I mean, you must have come across that after publishing a memoir. You must have had moments that you thought, is that really what happened? Did you?
I had those moments when I was writing it. Not so much the afterwards, but what was very interesting was that Amazon reviews started to come in, and to this day the only 1-star Amazon reviews I have are from close family members.
Yeah. Well, you see, I have a very big family.
Right,
so
it's a lot of 1 stars.
It's a lot of 1 stars.
That's like the Death Star of 1 stars. Okay, so let's go back to Conviction, because at the beginning, we alternate with chapters of this true crime podcast, which you've transcribed in there. And like you, I very much enjoy podcasts. But I wondered when you started it, if the podcast was pulling you away from the story, or if you just did the podcast and then just decided to sort of put it through, intersperse it.
Well, it was quite chaotically written. I don't want to misrepresent my method to you, but it was very chaotically written. And really, I wrote like 4 or 5 books, and the podcast was just vast. And one of the characters has 2 children. Leon has 2 children. Yeah. But at the start, the first draft, he had 7 children and they all had backstories. So it was a much longer podcast. And my editor said, "This is tedious and I can't read it, and I'm being paid to read it." So I had to do a lot of shaving back, but the podcast...
So before you started killing them in the book, you just killed 5 characters before you were like, first draft, they're all dead.
Yeah, exactly.
So Leon's got his 2 kids, and they're in the podcast, which is about this boat called the Dana. The Dana, like the International.
So the Dana sinks out at sea, and they're in a closed cabin. And it's closed because when they open the door, all the water rushes out. So it's obviously been sealed since it was on the surface. So it's a closed mystery, and you can't work out how this could possibly have happened and who did it. But it's really all about storytelling, and because she's going through a terrible time in her life, and I think we've all had that experience. I mean, everyone here's a reader, so we've all had that experience when you're on holiday with people you hate maybe, and the only way you can get through it is by reading, or you're doing a commute that you hate.
That sounds like a really bad holiday.
Yeah. I had quite a lot of holidays like that, I read a lot.
No, I'm just in my book. I'm just loving my book. 10 books later. So sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, or commuting. Do you know what I mean? So I think a lot of us, because I think reading and stories really, there are times when you like binging at night after you get in from your work, and there are times when you need to binge and be lost in another story.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're necessarily looking for answers to the story that you're in, but it's just a way of being outside your own reality. I think narrative has a really important function psychologically, you know, in terms of how we understand the world. And I think because if you're a crime writer, you know, very literary people very much look down on narrative as not important, but it's to be a celebration of narrative and how redemptive being lost in someone else's narrative can be. So basically, she starts listening to a true crime podcast, she recognises somebody in it, and she thinks, I know what happened here, and she goes off and tries to solve the mystery.
Yeah.
And so she gets completely lost in that.
I should say that when she starts listening to the podcast, it's an ordinary morning in her quite nice house in Glasgow.
Very nice.
Where she lives with her husband Hamish. Tell us about Hamish.
Well, Hamish is, well, essentially, Anna is a trophy wife. So he's the sort of braggadocio man who talks all the time. And I don't know if you know many trophy wives, but I've met quite a few trophy wives. They're amazing people. But you would never know that because there's always some blustery, red-faced idiot standing in front of them. No offence if you're a blustery, red-faced idiot. I don't mean to offend any trophy wives, but they're really amazing people. And I just kind of thought, you know, what a great place to hide if you wanted to hide. Yeah. But the thing is, she really loves him, and she loves him because he's really flawed. And there's a bit in the book where somebody reproaches her for being a bit of a cow, and she says, you know, and I needed to talk to someone who's as flawed as me, so she phones the husband that's run off with somebody.
Yeah, that's
you know
right.
what I mean? I think we've all done that.
But that's have we?
Yeah, I think we've all done that. Have we not?
I mean, not today. But I mean, I don't think she should be that surprised though, because Hamish got together with her when he was already married to somebody else, and she was pregnant.
Well, see, as you get older, you see these patterns recurring in people's lives, don't you? And it's like, oh, you know, your new wife, oh, another new wife, oh, exactly the same pattern. You do see and you see patterns like that repeating in your own. But I think if you're stuck in the middle of it, it's very hard to accept. So it shouldn't really be surprising, but I think she is quite surprised.
She is not a character who's doing her best to be likeable, or indeed always truthful. And she's the kind of person, if she was near me in a restaurant, I'd be like, shut up. Yeah. You know, she's quite irritating.
She is annoying.
Yeah, she
she's
is.
Very annoying.
What was that like to write?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely. Just someone saying, shut up.
Yeah.
And, you know, all the things that you think but would never say.
Yeah.
I love obnoxious women. I really do. I'm quite scared of them. But they are who I'm drawn to. And people who say the unsayable, do you know what I mean?
I want to go back to the podcast for a minute. What is it that you think a podcast can do that a novel can't?
I think podcasts are amazing. I think this is a new art form that we're watching develop. And I mean, it really is wild at the moment. People are breaking all sorts of laws because they're not bound by journalistic ethics or anything. So they're naming people, they're naming suspects. You know, posses are turning up at people's doors.
Is that really happening?
Yes, it's happening. In fact, in America now, when they have like Crime Watch and they say, you know, can anyone help us with this? Did anyone see everything? Quite often they put a codicil at the bottom and they say, please can gangs of idiots not turn up and try and solve this crime on their own because you're trampling over all the evidence. But I mean, it is like it's a big thing, and there, you know, there are podcasts about unsolved crimes, asking for information, asking the audience to get involved. But what I think is really interesting about it as a form is it's oral storytelling rather than written storytelling. So in writing a podcast, you know, I'm trying to sort of blend the two things together. And I often think actually that crime fiction comes from an oral storytelling tradition rather than a textual or text-bound tradition, you know. And there's a theory that Edgar Allan Poe invented crime fiction, but actually he was a newspaper editor, and there was The Death of Marie Roget was supposed to be the first crime novel, but it was a true crime story that somebody had gone to New Jersey for a day out and got murdered, and then he sort of fictionalized it up and made it into a book. So I mean, I think that, you know, the idea of people telling each other stories, it's such a profound connection that you have. And podcasters are very disinhibited, so they tell you very personal things about themselves. Yeah. You feel a real sense of ownership over them, you know? Yeah. It's fascinating.
So would you do a true crime podcast then?
I am doing a true crime podcast, actually. I am doing true crime, but not investigative. It's basically old crimes in Scotland that we're looking at, things like the Douglas cause, things that people have kind of forgotten about. So we're doing that, and we're looking at doing other ones. Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Well, I'm such a fan. I don't know if I'm going to be any good at it.
Right.
So yeah, because I mean, I have an encyclopedic knowledge of true crime podcasts.
What is that like, having all that in your head?
I'm going to disappoint you now. I don't feel any different. Because I think, if people don't like that kind of thing, or they don't like depictions of violence or any of that stuff, but it's just stuff I've always been interested in.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a ghoul. There is a sort of ghoul barometer, and you have to work out where you are in the ghoul barometer. Yeah. And sometimes podcasters do live shows, and I've taken friends to things that were far too hardcore for them, and they were disgusted.
I mean, I was quite scared when I read the scene where the diver goes into the boat.
Oh, were you?
Well, I was staying in a hotel on my own in Glasgow, and I put the ironing board back the wrong way in my wardrobe. And I read it, and I went to bed, and I was like, oh my God, it's just your mind. You can't hear noise. There isn't anybody in the room. There isn't anybody in the room. There isn't anybody in the room. And eventually I got up and opened the cupboard door, and it was the ironing board slowly sliding down the wall. And I just read that diving scene, and honestly, it gave me the heebies. I lost a night's sleep.
Oh, yes!
I'm glad you're thrilled.
I am thrilled.
Yeah,
I actually am thrilled.
Okay, good, no good. Please join me in thanking Denise Mina. Take Nothing With You is a story of coming of age, of coming out, and of surviving a 1970s childhood in Weston-super-Mare. Eustace is a boy with lots of secrets. It's a sharp but gentle story about the power of music, friendship, and love. Please welcome the wonderful Patrick Gale. Welcome to Helensburgh.
What a lovely venue.
Isn't it nice? I know. I arranged it especially. It's very, very, very nice.
And I love your Edgar Allan Poe lamp. I quite want that.
Oh, I know, quoth the raven. Was that the right line?
Yes.
I'm just looking to you for that, Denise. Now, you're going to give us a wee reading from Take Nothing With You.
I will.
Which bit?
Well, do you want a smutty bit or do you want a good clean bit? I shouldn't have asked that, really. I'll read a clean bit.
Oh,
since we're in Helensburgh,
I was going to say, since we're in a church, I was like, no. OK, go for it. Read what you want.
So this book has two beginnings, and I'm going to read the second beginning because it's told in the present day and in the 1970s. So this is the start of the 1970s. Eustace lived in hell, or at least its antechamber. Or perhaps purgatory was a fairer comparison, since he was not unusually abused, and he was clothed and fed, and with both parents still living. On the rare occasions when people asked where he lived, they tended to exclaim, "Oh, Weston-super-Mare, how lovely, lucky boy. It must be like being on holiday every day." And he knew they were thinking seaside, sunshine, donkey rides on the beach. But Weston had estuary mud, not proper sand, and was no sunnier than anywhere else in England. His surviving granny said the rain came across the Bristol Channel directly from Wales, which made it more penetrating and with a tendency to leave coal streaks on drying laundry. And if he lived in a place where people came on holiday, it made things like going to school harder. And when you tried to do holiday-ish things on your doorstep, like going to the beach, you felt people stare. And if the sun did come out, it was crowded down by the water, and he had taken on his mother's horror of crowds. Only she didn't call them crowds, but trippers. Weston, his mother said, attracted something called the rougher element, and a few ugly incidents where the sons of visitors had thrown sand in his eyes or kicked over his carefully constructed sandcastles apparently confirmed this, and donkey hair made him wheeze. So although their house in Royal Crescent was close to the water, Eustace rarely went there for pleasure, preferring to ride his bicycle aimlessly around the streets or to find a shady corner of a public park.
The good people of Helensburgh are like, that's what it's like when people from Glasgow come. It's a nightmare.
The rougher element.
The rougher elements of
They're
Glasgow.
going past you on their motorbikes, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I can hear them outside. So, how and when did the idea for this come about? Because Weston-super-Mare is not the most obvious place to set a novel.
No, and it's an out-of-the-way place. I live at the very end of England, at the tip of Cornwall, and I'd never gone to
on Land's End.
On Land's End.
If you send posts to Patrick Gale, care of Land's End, it will get there.
I do get fan mail written to Patrick Gale, the last puff in England. And it has literally...
That's just geographically.
No, Weston, it's all because the librarians in Weston-super-Mare foolishly invited me to give a reading from my previous novel, A Place Called Winter. And I'd never been to Weston, so I went early. And I'm a nervous traveller, so I got there very early, and I ended up walking around Weston for a couple of hours. And when I got on stage for the event, I was a little bit nervous, and I just said the first thing that came into my head, which was, "Thank you for inviting me to Weston. What an awful place." So I then backtracked, as you do.
There's not much backtracking from that, to be fair. That's quite hard. Anyway,
Well, no, I backtracked rather slyly, being a novelist, and added to that, well, what an awful place it would have been to have been a teenager in the 1970s. Not now, of course. I sort of pledged on the spot to write a novel set in Weston.
just to stop them attacking you.
Which was a stupid thing to do, because, of course, I then had to keep going back to Weston to research the book. And by the end of the process, I'd rather fallen in love with it. I love melancholy seaside resorts, and Weston is seriously melancholy, out of season. But it is the place you can imagine having a terrible 1970s childhood, with no internet, really, not much on television, just aimlessly, hanging around on your bicycle. And poor Eustace is an outcast. He's a bit chubby. He has one friend who's a fellow outcast, Vernon. And really, his home life is not much cop, because his parents run one of Weston's countless old people's homes. So
he lives in an old people's home?
He lives in an old people's home, wakes up smelling the bedpans and hearing the demented crying out. And life isn't really very nice. And his parents are no longer in love, if they ever have been.
Oh, tell us about his parents.
Well, his mother was a girl in pearls in country life. So she thought she was going to have a rather better life than living in an old people's home in Weston-super-Mare. And his father is, in the course of the novel, having a slow-motion nervous breakdown. There's quite a lot of mental illness in my books, and this book has heaps of it, really, in a disguised form. But his life is saved by music.
In the form of the incredible Carla
Gold, who you have to imagine a cross between, I don't know, Julie Christie and Catherine Deneuve. I mean, Weston has never seen the like. She is sexy, she's young, she's hugely talented, and she doesn't stay in Weston for very long. But she's modelled on a couple of young cellists I knew when I was about Eustace's age, because I also learned the cello. In its way, it's a very autobiographical novel. There's a lot of me hidden away in various bits. And Carla Gold gives a recital in Weston, a wonderful cello recital, and Eustace has never seen the like. And his mother immediately signs him up for cello lessons with her. But she's not like most music teachers. She takes it very seriously, and she says to Eustace in the first lesson, "I'm not going to teach you if this is only going to be a hobby. Music has to be a passion. And do you know the other meaning of passion? It also means suffering." And of course, Eustace is completely thrilled. It's the most dramatic thing he's ever heard.
Yeah, he's a little masochist, isn't he?
Yeah, totally.
And he's totally thrilled by the
Deep
prospect
down,
of it.
Eustace wants to be a ballet dancer and have blood coming out of his shoes. Practicing so hard. So when he learns the cello, it really becomes a passion very quickly.
I'm very interested in that idea that this is not a transformation but a transfiguration, that it's necessarily through pain and suffering that Eustace changes. It's not like he's going there and having a lovely time.
No, I mean,
it's extraordinarily difficult.
I wanted to show how, at the time you're learning an instrument like this, yes, it can be transformative because you're learning something wonderful, art is coming into your life, but underneath that, if you're being taught well, you're learning resilience. And that's where the modern day story comes into play, because we see from the start Eustace as an adult. We know he has survived whatever happened to him in his boyhood. We know he is no longer a professional cellist, as he hopes to be as a little boy. But the key thing is he has learnt resilience. And in the course of the novel, terrible things happen to him. But we see, because we see him surviving, we see him as an adult too.
Yeah.
I hope we see the way that those music lessons are teaching him a way of withstanding bad stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean...
And this novel had so many working titles, and one of them was Studies for Resilience, which I rather liked. I'm saving it up for a French translation or something. But,
And what were the other titles?
well, the main other title, which it was called for ages, was Thumb Position. And I'm a very innocent cellist. I thought thumb position, it's a cello technique thing. My editor took one look at the title page with thumb position on it and said, darling, you can't call it this. People will think it's about sex. But thumb position is a cello thing. There are several positions of your left hand on the cello, starting with half position, and it goes right up to the point where your fingers are pointing downwards, but your thumb is still out of sight. And then thumb position is when you bring your thumb round and you press it into the strings, which lets you play very high at different pitches. But when you're teaching thumb position to a child, they bleed because...
Where from?
Well, you're pressing... You feel my thumb there is a pad there. There's a callus.
Oh, there is?
But when you're teaching the cello to a child, they haven't yet got that callus. So you're taking their little 8-year-old thumb and basically pressing it into a cheese wire and then telling them to pull it up and down. So when Eustace has his first thumb position lesson, he bleeds. And of course he's
thrilled.
He's thrilled, because it's like the blood in the ballet shoes.
Yeah, he absolutely loves that suffering. And his secret is that he's gay, and yet he doesn't know this yet.
Isn't it always the case? The child is the last person to know.
Everybody around him seems to know, but he doesn't know. And of course, his friend Vernon and him get up to things.
Yeah, well, they experiment, as boys do.
Yeah, filthy little things. But I mean, again, I found that enormously kind of, for me, as a reader of fiction, that's it's exactly what I went through in my teens, that sense of feeling lost and also having to do things in secret and
but
feeling ashamed.
And I wanted to show the way for most gay children now, as in the 1970s, you have to elect extra parents.
Yeah.
Your own parents, unless they happen to be lesbians or gay men, will not provide the lessons you need. So alongside the cello lessons with Carla, Eustace gets lessons on how to be gay.
From boys.
The boys, these very charming gay men who Carla lives with when she gets the hell out of Weston. One of them is a painter and one is a pianist. And the painter has rather a good collection of gay fiction and non-fiction. And rather sweetly, he gently pushes books Eustace's way. And this was really recreating what happened to me when I was a young teenager. First of all, I made friends with a gay ex-hairdresser who was running a cafe that we all went to because you could smoke there when I was a schoolboy. And Ray kind of taught me how to be, he showed me how gay men worked as well. Not in a sinister way, just socially, how they could survive. And he gave me little bits of advice, like, when you can, go on holiday to Mykonos, which I did at 17. That's why I finally lost my virginity. But
That's better than your holiday, Denise.
yeah. I didn't read much on that holiday.
Books upside down. Let's talk a wee bit about your new screenwriting career.
Oh, my word, yes. I've been
very
quite busy, because after Man in an Orange Shirt, I got quite a few commissions. So I'm working on a big television adaptation of A Place Called Winter, my last novel.
Oh, wow.
Which will be very expensive if it comes off. I can't say the name yet, but I'm touching Formica that we have...
It's actually real.
Oh, sorry. Touching cheek. That we have a really very exciting gay film director is coming on board to do his first television work.
Oh, that's
I'm just saying that I'm terrified I've jinxed it.
Everyone's just now doing the math. Who is it? How many are there? Yeah.
And alongside that, I'm also doing a very naughty piece of adaptation. I'm doing a 21st century queer rewrite of Henry James's The Wings of the Dove.
Fabulous.
Into a great big sort of Netflixy show. And I'm having enormous fun with that because I'm changing the genders, I'm changing the races, the whole thing. It's still Henry James. At the heart of it is his amazingly over-the-top and very disturbing plot.
Oh, yeah.
But Millie, who is the dying heiress in the book, becomes Billy, who is a dying boy. from Nigeria, as it happens. So things like that. It's enormous fun.
Well, we'll let you get back to Cornwall. Thank you very much for joining us. The wonderful Patrick Gale! The village of Buncara has just one traffic light, but hundreds of secrets and rumours. Elizabeth Keane returns there from New York to clear her mother's house, and when she's emptying the wardrobe, she finds a box of letters. Is she who she thinks she is? Is her mother who she thinks she was? I joined the Tales from the City book group in Hillhead Library to find out what they thought of all the goings-on in Graham Norton's second novel, A Keeper. When I was wee, libraries were a place of solace for me. They were a place I went to hide. But in certain books, I also found myself. I'm going to Hillhead Library to meet Tales from the City book group. But before I do, I'm going to speak to Derek Patrick, the founding member. So you started the book group. Why and when?
I started it because I wanted a place that people could go to reduce social isolation, that wasn't going to a bar, wasn't going to a club. This was a place where people could just come and talk about books, about their sexuality in relation to the books that they're reading without actually worrying about other people's thoughts of them. When I first started it, I was absolutely terrified nobody was going to turn up. I no longer run the book group, Sean runs it now, and it just seems to keep growing and being successful.
Loved this.
It's brilliant. It's
good.
an amazing book.
Made me cry.
It's so emotional. The fiction books that we have here are all ones that are strong LGBTQ characters within them, or stories.
Hello. Hello. Hiya. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Graham Norton's book, A Keeper. So what were our initial thoughts?
Yeah, I hadn't read a Graham Norton book before, and I was like, he's a celebrity, give him some money and write a book. But actually, I really enjoyed it.
I liked how, right from the word go, the 2-page prologue sets your inquisitiveness up. So that really propels you to read the rest of the book.
It started and felt kind of like a quiet book, and then it was very quickly very dramatic, and I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
I'm half Irish, and I thought he sums up the cadences of Irish speech so well. I mean, Mrs. Foley, I can imagine that being my grandmother, the way she spoke.
I mean, hopefully that's where the resemblance ends.
Yes.
Yes, your question for Graham. And bear in mind, I've got my hand on the lever. I can always tip him right back.
I would like to ask him if his next book is going to have a more higher profile gay characters.
So thanks very much for letting me come to your book club today. I've loved it. And please send me your reading list, because I feel like I've got a lot to catch up on. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
These aren't bookshelves. They're a mirror that you can look in and find yourself and find a new way forward. As a wee boy, I started my reading life at my local library, and it would have made such a huge difference to me to have a group like the one that I've just met and to have a section like this. Making the leap from chair to sofa, it's Graham Norton!
Thank you very much. Oh, cheers. Yes. Cheers. Cheers. I was going to heckle and could I have wine, and then it magically appeared.
I know, we're very good like that.
It pays to have a reputation.
It's very nice wine, actually.
It's lovely, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, you don't have any.
No, it's hard with this because there's loads of spoilers.
Yes, it is quite twisty and turny.
It is very twisty and turny, like a wee Irish backroad, but you're going to give us a reading that's not too revealing.
No, this is just from very near the beginning, really. One of the characters, Patricia, back in the 70s, she finds herself still single in her early 30s after her mother dies, and she thinks it's not too late, I'm going to find love. And she's been corresponding with someone, and she finally agrees to go and meet him in Cork. The date does not go well. This is the end of her first date. Finally, They were back at the station. Half an hour too early for her train, but Patricia really didn't care. She just wanted the day to end. They stood facing each other at the entrance, and she was just about to shake his hand and thank him for the lunch when he thrust his head forward like a cuckoo exiting a clock to announce the hour. Before she knew what was happening, he had pecked at her lips. She let out an involuntary yelp of surprise. "Oh, sorry, He searched for one of his few words. "No, it's..." Patricia too was struggling. "Well, yes, I leave so." "Right. Thanks for the lunch." Now he was staring at her, his shoulders hunched, his hands knotting and twisting his fingers. Patricia longed for him to go, but still he stood there. "Go," she silently screamed at him in her head. Surely he wasn't enjoying this either. His face looked as if he was thinking about something else, remembering a great sadness. "Sorry," he whispered, and turned quickly to walk away. Patricia suddenly wanted to call after him, to somehow reassure him, make him feel better about how the day had gone. She thought about the man who knew all the words of The Banks of the Lee. Why hadn't she been able to spend the afternoon with that man? How had the man who had written her such sweet letters been turned to stone in her presence? Patricia walked beneath the large station clock, confident there wouldn't be a next time. That's good.
But there is a next time.
There is, and I understand why. Because, you know, dating, I think, is such an act of bravery, and I find there's something so romantic about the leap of faith, that you leave your house to go and meet a stranger. I mean, essentially, every date should end in a murder.
They do in Denise's
Yeah, I know, in Denise's world they do. But this, I just find that sort of very moving. And now, you know, you just go home and start flipping right or left or whatever on your app. But back in the 70s, you know, you had to write a letter. So by the time you wrote the letters, by the time you agreed to meet someone, you were quite invested in someone already. And it's a bit like sort of turning an oil tanker round to try and meet somebody else. So after that, they then correspond a bit more, and she decides to try again because, you know,
He's better
not
in
a
his
bad
letters.
man.
He's better in his letters.
He's much better in his letters.
Yeah, he's better in his letters. And how does the letter exchange start to happen?
Oh, it begins with a Lonely Hearts column in the Irish Farmers Journal. And when I started to promote this book, I talked about this. It was called the Getting in Touch thing, and it was all kind of, you know, TT farmer from Westmeath seeks lady, blah blah blah.
What's a TT farmer?
Oh, teetotal.
Oh.
So a teetotal farmer, that means he doesn't drink and he's got land. It's a catch. So I was talking about this column, and I was saying, of course, you know, this was back before the internet, blah 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 blah. I got a very irate message. "Oh no, the column still exists." There are obviously parts of rural Ireland that have slipped through the worldwide net, and so they still use it. The people still write to each other to a PO box.
That's quite romantic in a way.
It is romantic and yet very time-consuming.
Yeah. So the novel alternates between two different perspectives. So that was a bit about Patricia on a date there with
Yes.
Mr. Foley. Tell us about Elizabeth.
So Elizabeth comes back to Ireland to do that horrible job that we all have done or face of clearing out your parents' house. And she finds these letters. And she never knew who her father was. And these letters are kind of the key to that mystery. And so she decides to follow the trail back to find out who he was. And what you discover is why the mother, Patricia, kept it a secret from Elizabeth. And she kept the secret because she loved her daughter. And yet, by keeping the secret, she made it much harder for Elizabeth to love her. And there's something so kind of selfless in that as a parent, that you spend your whole life trying to protect that person, even though it's hurting you.
It's incredibly noble. She's a brilliant mum.
But I think
in a
also
way.
that's a good parent and a terrible parent. You know, in the end, why not tell the truth? The truth is ultimately a good thing. But I understand why she kept it a secret.
It does seem from this novel and from your last novel that Ireland is just full of these really dark stories.
Well, it is, and I don't know whether that's peculiar to Ireland, but, if I go out on a walk with my mother, every house you pass has some, terrible scandal or, she ran away with that teacher or their daughter's now a pole dancer in Sydney or, every house. So you can't put it all, but, you've got to drive past some houses if you're writing a book and then just stand, stop at the really good house. And there's something also, I think, about Ireland where there's community, but there's also, within that community, there's isolation. So, I'm very struck when I come to Scotland that when you get to the top of a mountain or something, and you look out, there's acres and acres of nothing, just absolute wilderness, emptiness. In Ireland, oddly, you get to the top of the mountain and there's the acres and it looks the same, except there's always houses. Always. And I guess because we didn't have the clearances or whatever, but there's always houses. And so those people all know each other, but at the same time, all sorts of things can be happening at the end of that lane. You don't know. So there's a kind of a closeness and a kind of an incestuousness, but at the same time, every house is kind of cloaked in secrecy.
Are you writing another novel now?
I am. I'm sort of, let's say halfway through. I'm not halfway through.
Have you started it?
No, I have no. All right, Dad. I have started it, and it sounds like it's very dark, and it does have a very dark beginning, in that it's something that happens to a horrible degree in Ireland, where there are these kind of car crashes, and they seem to happen in the summer. And I think it's kind of people have left school or people back from university, and it's sort of joyriding, not quite joyriding. It's just kids out and about, and they're just, they make mistakes, and there are crashes and people die. And so it begins with a car crash. There are 6 young people in the car, 3 die, 3 live. And one of the main characters in the book is the driver of the car. Because I found that really interesting. What happens to that person?
The survival guilt.
Yes, how does their life continue in that place if you're carrying that burden? And you're so young and you've made a terrible mistake with awful implications, but yet you've got to go on living. So I just wondered what would happen to that person. So it's the story of that boy and his sister.
Okay.
And there is a big twist in it.
Is that inspired by a real story?
Lots of stories. Again, there's a story that you couldn't put in a book because it's too crazy. I was in a restaurant and the waitress said, "Oh, would you sponsor me? I'm doing a sponsored skydive." And we thought, fine. We're raising money because, like this, there's been one of these accidents. This isn't a funny story, it's just a kind of a mad story. So there's been an accident, and her friend had been in the car, and she had been taken to intensive care in Dublin. She was now paralysed from the neck down, and she was going to have to be, adapt the house. So they were raising money to adapt the house so she could live in the house. So we're talking blah, 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 blah. Firstly, I thought a sponsored skydive seemed a risky thing to do to raise money for that. But then I said to her, do they need to do much to the house? And this is unbelievable. She said, not really, no. Because 2 years ago, she'd been in a car crash and been paralysed from the waist down, but then had regained movement and then was in this other car crash. Now, you couldn't put that in a novel because you just go, well, that's just stupid. Yeah. But that is the real world, and that is, those sorts of lives are being lived all around us.
I've got a question for you from our book group, which is, will you be writing a more prominent gay character in your new book? So are any of those 2 characters?
It's as if it's been planned. No, in the new book, no, seriously, in the new book, I have allowed one of the main characters to be gay. I sort of felt I'd sort of earned it, having done 2 books where none of the main characters were gay. And that was deliberate because, that thing of being bloke off the telly writing a book, I was trying to keep myself out of the story as much as possible, so that there was some chance that the reader could enjoy it without me kind of peering over their shoulder. And so I kind of thought, well, I've done that twice now. I think I'm allowed to have a gay character. And he's very different than me, and he's led a very different life than me.
Is that the driver of the car?
It is.
Ooh. So why, given that you don't really need to, is it that you have now thrown yourself into writing novels? Because when I got the first one, I was surprised, A, that he had really written it because I asked him, and B, that it was good. Because I think that people have they have expectations of us in our lives. We're put into boxes. This person does this, and they don't expect them to do anything else, and kind of also a bit of stay in your lane, I think. I was delighted.
Well, that's very nice of you. There are two things. I think both these books have benefited from people's very, very low expectations of what my novel might be. But also, I have to say, the writing community, certainly to my face, have been really welcoming. You know, if you guys suddenly announced you were doing a chat show, I'm not sure I'd be that supportive. That's all I'm saying. But writers have been incredibly kind to me.
So when did you decide you were going to, take the stories that you'd put in the story bank and actually work them up into fiction?
I think when I was, in my late teens, early 20s, that's when I wrote a lot. And that was when I really seriously wanted to write. But of course I was busy then. I was out, wasn't I? I couldn't write a book. Yeah. So you cut to you're turning 50 and you think, if I'm going to do this, I really need to do this. So that was kind of my kind of starting point. And, I woke up age 52, a debut novelist. And, and I like that because...
The 52-year-old virgin.
Yes. Well, no, because my younger self, if you said I was going to be doing anything for the first time at 52, I'd have been very surprised, unless it was die. So I was sort of thrilled to have this new thing at this stage of my life.
So, and how do you manage to do it, and with all the telly?
Well, because... I suppose because it's something I love doing. Yeah. So if it was a chore, if it was something I hated, then I couldn't fit it in. But because I can block out days for the books, and when I see those days coming up, I'm like, oh, great, it's a book day. Yeah. And it also means you don't really have the luxury of, writer's block or anything, because you've got to keep going. Yeah. Otherwise, it won't be done. The thing that surprised me most about this process is that I'm good at deadlines. When the book is supposed to be there, it's there. There has never been any indication that that's who I am in my life up until this point. I mean, I was not that guy ever. Yeah. But for some reason, I think because it could just drag on forever. I think the people who are astonishing to me are people who don't have a book deal and not only start a book, but finish it. Yeah. Because, I mean, that's the hardest thing, is getting to that bit. Yeah. I remember when I was writing the first book, I was in the office and I was going, oh God, I hope it's okay, I hope it's good. And
did you write it with the deal?
Yes.
Okay.
Hence, I finished it.
Okay.
And then one of the writers in the office just went, look at it this way. If you finish your book, it's one of the best books in the world. Because most books are in a drawer, they're on a memory stick, they're in the back of a computer somewhere. They're not finished. So if you finish it, you're already part of quite an elite club.
Would you ever write for the screen as well, or is it just the novels that you like?
That seems to... Probably not, because actually what I like about this is how uncollaborative it is. That most of my life, most of my jobs are sitting in rooms, having meetings, going, that'll do. And or that's fine. And what's nice about this is it's just me. Yeah. And I think if I got into screenwriting, and I'm sure you got this, Patrick, where suddenly you have to talk to people again, and everyone has an opinion. And yes, this becomes collaborative at the end when the editor's working with you and you're having meetings and all that sort of stuff. But the bulk of the work is solitary. And if that was my only job, I might go a bit doolally. Yeah. But as a reaction and as a contrast to everything else I do, I love it.
The island that you describe in both the novels is an island that's changing really quickly. And I was reading your memoirs again recently, and it's
I know, I go back to them all the time.
just when I can't sleep.
They're like
at
the
night,
Bible.
I'm just there, and I'm just like, oh.
Yeah, Gideon Bible or Graham's memoirs. I don't know.
And it's a very different Ireland, and
Yes.
it's changed so much,
And-
more than any other country in the world, I think.
Whoopee for that. And I think it's about young people. I'm so impressed by Irish young people. They have a confidence without being cocky.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not precocious. They just have a, I don't know, they're self-assured and they're interested. And the other thing is, they're so proud of where they live now. They're so proud of the change. And you see young people fashioning a republic that's fit for purpose. This is a country that we can stay in. We can remain here and live our lives here. We don't have to leave. And I wonder now, if I was sort of 20 again, would I be in such a rush to leave? Probably not. I'm sure I'd still be curious about the rest of the world and want to travel.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I was, really like Greyhound in the slips. The minute I could get out, I got out. I just ran away. And I think now there isn't that kind of pressure to leave.
When did you start to turn back towards Ireland?
That was really when my father got ill. Because, as I say, when I left, I just thought, well, that's grand, that's over there. And I would go back for Christmas, that sort of thing. And then my father got diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so I would go back more, and I would go and visit him and go and try and help my mom. And it was really when he died that it just gave me an appreciation of small-town Ireland. I remembered when I was growing up and people died, and everyone would be going around the house with, the bottles of whiskey and the cake and the platters of sandwiches under a damp tea towel. And you just thought, oh God, leave them alone. Isn't that awful? All those people knocking on the door. And of course, when it happens to you, that's exactly what you want. You want people to come around. You want people to tell stories about your father. And it sort of makes him more alive, because you're discovering a man you didn't know. In your head, he was just your dad. That's all he was. But suddenly these people are telling you about a work colleague or a friend or someone they went on holidays with. And I thought it was lovely. And Ireland's very good at death. In London, I've had friends die, and where nobody knows what to do. You sort of go round to a house and you raise a glass, but there isn't a family, and there isn't and there's no apparatus in place. So, and it was just, I said in the memoir that, all the things that when I was growing up, I felt they were there to hold you back. When you're older and in a situation like that, they're there to support you. I felt stupid. You feel really dumb that your younger self hadn't seen that side of it.
But your younger self had to get away to stay alive. I mean, you couldn't have stayed there and been an out happy gay man, I don't think, at that time.
No, I wouldn't have been an out happy gay man. But I'd have lived, I imagine, barring an industrial accident or a tractor. No, I didn't want to live there. I didn't want to live there. I wanted to go find my tribe.
Would you go back there and live?
I mean, I do go back a lot. I spend sort of 2.5 months every summer there. And I love going back there. Could I live there full time? I don't know. When I leave, I'm always sorry I'm leaving.
Yeah.
But if I stayed for 4 months, would I still be sorry I'm leaving? Or would I be kind of scratching at the door of the airport? I don't know. One of the things I like about Ireland, though, is because my life is kind of odd, living in London and working in television and stuff, and people knowing who you are and all that sort of stuff. When I go back to Ireland, because where I am is quite a small town, it's like everyone's famous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They know who I am.
But everybody knows who everybody
yes,
is. Yes.
But so I'm Graham off the telly, but that's John from the Butchers, that's Mary who does the till at Super Value, that's, so everyone has an identity. It's just I have a slightly more glamorous job. And it does kind of keep you sane.
We'll let you go and get on with it. Please join me in thanking Graham Norton. Inua Ellams lifts his poems and plays straight off the page and right into your heart, and that's where they'll stay forever. He's here tonight to perform Swallow Twice, a poem about what it means to be a boy thinking about being a man. Please welcome Inua Ellams.
Swallow twice. Given the smallest prompt, Father will describe how I skulked just beyond the lamplight's reach, watching the ring of men, ripe with beer and laughter, push thick fingers into the mountain of spiced meat, roasted with onions, ginger, and chilies like an altar I fought to worship at, swiping through the arms of the chunks, a mouse attempting to feast with kings. Frustrated, Father stopped the rapid speech so I could reach in, greedily choose the choicest piece, ignore his warnings, and tear at the muscle, strain against the flesh, till his elasticity slipped through my fingers and a chunk, chilies and all, slapped into my eyes. Father thumped my back as I coughed on a pepper. Swallow twice, he urged, dropping the wailing mess of me on my mother's knees. What Father didn't know is that I imagined the key to their impenetrable talk lay in the cubed meat, and I longed to be like them. In the circle of friends I have, most of our conversations revolve around music, the heft and sway of the changing world, the rapid rates of our redundance, how best to pretend we know it all. And when beer loosens what inhibitions are left after shredding meat with bare fingers, laughter cloaks our weaknesses, our inabilities to provide for those we love, who love us, we who still know nothing of what our lovers want. How frightening it is to have nephews growing up who want to be like us, who want to be like men.
That's it for tonight. So please join me in thanking our amazing book group, Tales from the City. You for joining me here in Helensburgh, and our amazing guests, Denise, Mina, Patrick Gale, Graham Lawson, and Inua Ellams. I'll see you again, I hope. Until then, happy reading.